Tell me where you're from. What corner of the world are you calling home right now? That connection with you matters deeply to our community. Now let me take you back to a moment that shifted everything I thought I knew about myself, about desire, about what it means to wake up after years of being asleep. I stepped outside into the night without a plan, without even really thinking about it. My silk robe hung loose around my shoulders, feet bare against the cool tile, and something deep inside me was pulling toward the water like a compass needle finding true north. I had been listening to him swim for weeks now, ever since he'd moved into the guest cottage on my property. The sound had become a kind of meditation for me, those late-night splashes and the rhythm of someone moving through water with the kind of ease that suggested comfort in his own body. I pretended not to notice. I pretended not to wait for the sound, but pretending is an art form when you've spent as many years alone as I have. He was younger, of course. Much younger. The kind of younger that made people raise their eyebrows if they'd seen us together. But there was something about the way he moved through the world, the way he existed in his own skin with such casual confidence, that made the years between us feel less like a wall and more like a bridge that someone had already started to cross. I'd first noticed his hands when he arrived. They were beautiful hands, rough at the knuckles but long-fingered, the kind of hands that suggested capability, that suggested knowing how to touch things without breaking them. That particular evening, I gave myself permission to do what I'd been thinking about for weeks. I stepped outside, let my robe slip down my shoulders, and walked toward the pool where I could hear him moving through the water. The night was warm, thick with the scent of jasmine blooming in the garden, and underneath that, the sharp, clean smell of chlorine. He was in the deep end when I arrived, moving through the moonlit water like something that belonged there, like the pool had been waiting for him all along. When he saw me, he didn't wave or call out. He simply slowed his strokes and watched, floating upright, his dark eyes catching the light as he registered what was happening. I let the robe fall completely. The air touched my skin for the first time in what felt like forever, and instead of the self-consciousness I might have expected, I felt liberation. My body had been hidden for so long, covered in layers of responsibility and habit, and the kind of careful distance you maintain when you're afraid of being seen. But standing there, naked in the moonlight, I felt like I was finally being known. I waded into the water slowly, letting it climb my legs, my thighs, my hips, until I was submerged in the coolness of it. My breath caught, not from cold, but from the electric awareness of his presence, the way his eyes followed my every movement. There was no rushing between us, just a slow gravitational pull, the kind that doesn't demand anything but presence. He drifted closer, and I noticed how deliberate his movements were. Like every stroke was a question, every glance an invitation that I could accept or refuse without consequence. But I didn't want to refuse. I hadn't wanted to refuse anything in a very long time. We circled each other in that water like we were learning a language that had existed long before words were invented. His fingers trailed along my arm, barely touching, but the contact sent shivers through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. My skin answered him, responding to every near touch with goosebumps and quickened breath. We were so close that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, the warmth that rose between us like steam from a bath. My legs brushed against his, and instead of stepping back, I let them linger. There was a particular kind of electricity that crackled in that space, the kind that builds when two people hover at the edge of permission, not sure who will cross the line first, but knowing that eventually someone will. His mouth came close to mine, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath, but he didn't kiss me. Not yet. Instead, he traced the curve of my shoulder with his lips, barely making contact, just enough to make my breath catch in my throat. He circled me like a predator who wasn't sure whether to pounce or wait for the prey to ask him to. I floated there, arms loose at my sides, my chest rising with each heartbeat that had grown louder, more insistent. And it was the look on his face that finally undid me. There was nothing cocky about it, nothing possessive, just focus, tenderness, something that looked almost like reverence, like he was looking at something sacred and wild all at the same time. The water held my bare skin like it had been waiting for it, cool and smooth against curves that had felt neglected for far too long. I let myself sink deeper, hair trailing in wet waves down my back, limbs loose now, the tension shifting from my shoulders to somewhere deeper, somewhere that pulsed with a need I had buried so successfully that I'd almost forgotten it was there. Every nerve in my body had come alive, sharpened, made ready for something I'd been denying myself. His chest skimmed past mine as he moved through the water, and I turned to follow his trajectory, letting the moonlight catch the hollow between my ribs, the soft curve of my stomach, every part of me that had spent years hidden beneath layers of fabric and caution. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was inviting without words, opening without asking, letting my body speak a language that my mouth had forgotten how to use. His hand found my waist, and the touch was electric, not demanding but promising. A promise that stretched across every year between us and made the age difference feel not irrelevant but transformed, like it was part of what made this moment so charged with meaning. There was something reverent in the way he moved around me, like I was something rare, something that only made sense in moonlight and wet skin and the shared understanding of need. I reached for him, letting my hand rest on his chest, feeling his heartbeat accelerate beneath my palm. His skin was slick with water and warmth, and I could feel the tension underneath, the readiness that existed just barely beneath the surface of his breathing. His mouth was close to mine, close enough for the heat of it to rise with every shared breath. We hovered there, skin brushing skin without closing that final gap, and something shifted inside me. Something heavy and slow, like a lock clicking open somewhere in my spine. I wasn't afraid. I hadn't felt this much in years. This kind of electric knowing, this wild bloom of attraction that lived in every blink and touch and half-second of restraint, the kind that builds in layers, one heartbeat over the next, until neither of you can remember who pulled who into the first place. He moved behind me then, and I felt the heat of his breath on the curve of my shoulder. His hands rose through the water, skimming along my sides, and every touch felt like a discovery, like he was mapping territory that had been unexplored for too long. My back arched instinctively, and I leaned into him, pressing my hips into his, my shoulders resting against his chest. The contact lit a fuse inside me that had been buried under years of routine and solitude and the kind of careful distance you maintain when you're afraid of wanting too much. His mouth didn't land directly on me, but the space where it hovered crackled with intention. I found myself unraveling without being touched in any place that would make it obvious. The teasing was deliberate, masterful, his hands guiding the water, circling my waist, trailing across my ribs like a cartographer sketching lines on an unexplored coast. I opened my eyes barely and caught a reflection in the glass doors of the house. Two forms in the water, intertwined but not fused, glowing like figures in a dream that didn't care about names or roles or consequences. My breath came faster, my body moving in slow, small rhythms against his, like every inch was chasing friction. Each pulse in my belly matched the movement of his fingers that had drifted lower, skimming in lazy patterns that never settled, only stirred. I wanted more, but even the wanting felt like an indulgence, a luxury I had denied myself for so long that it now arrived with dizzying sweetness. He pulled us toward the shallow end, where I could stand, where the water came to my chest and his came to his waist. His hands found my jaw, and he finally kissed me, and it was everything I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. The kiss started soft and turned deeper, slower, the kind that isn't a beginning but a confirmation that everything up until now had been foreplay. His tongue found mine with ease, with confidence, with the kind of hunger that suggested he'd been thinking about this too. The kiss didn't fade. It deepened, grew warmer, heavier, tasting more like surrender than invitation. My hands had found his back, palms sliding over skin that flexed under my fingers, muscles tightening as his mouth opened against mine. Water clung to us in beads and ripples, but the heat beneath it outmatched everything else. It rose from our skin, from the way his chest moved against mine, from the rhythm that built between my thighs without ever being directly touched. He gripped my waist tighter, pulling me flush against him, and every inch of contact pulled a sound from me that I hadn't heard in years, a breathy, uncontrolled sound I barely recognized as my own. I curled against him, knees floating, arms around his neck, my body completely given over to the movement of his hips against mine. It was slow and measured in the water, like he was testing my limits, mapping my pressure points, discovering how I responded to each shift and slide. It was maddening. It was addictive. I didn't want it to stop. I wanted it to go slower and harder and deeper all at once. He didn't speak. I didn't ask him to. There were better things than words. The soft moan in his throat, the catch in his breath when my fingers scraped gently down his spine, the trembling push of his thigh between mine. Those were the languages we needed. At some point, he guided us both to the shallow step, where my legs could wrap around his waist more firmly, where my arms could rest over his shoulders. His hands found the underside of my thighs, and his lips brushed the top of my chest, his tongue tracing patterns against wet skin that tightened under each pass. The robe was somewhere far off by then, useless, and I was bare in every sense of the word. I felt weightless and heavy at once, anchored to the way he held me but floating inside a body that pulsed like it was younger, hungrier, braver than I remembered. He pressed his forehead to mine, and we stayed there for a long moment, breath tangled, chests heaving against one another in a rhythm that had nothing to do with swimming and everything to do with release. The crickets had quieted, or maybe I just didn't hear them anymore. My attention had tunneled into the warmth of his hands against the curve of my back, the slide of his lips along my jaw, the whisper of skin on skin just under the surface. I tilted my head, gave him more, let his mouth find my neck, that space beneath it that made my stomach tighten and twist, hips shifting instinctively against him. His fingers slid lower, underwater now, tracing the inside of my thigh with something close to reverence. I moved with him into him, riding that slow, rising tempo that felt less like a sprint and more like the slow drag of a storm rolling in. Time blurred. The moon shifted, water splashed and settled. At some point he stood, lifting me with ease, my arms wrapped around his shoulders, and carried me from the pool. I felt the air wrap around my skin like a sheet, cool and welcome after so much heat. His skin smelled like chlorine and sex, and something I'd forgotten how to name. He laid me on the couch just inside the glass doors, my body still slick, eyes darker now, like whatever restraint he'd held back with was gone. I pulled him down to me, hands in his hair, mouth reclaiming his, and our bodies pressed again with nothing, tentative, left between us. I could feel everything, his weight, his warmth, the intensity with which he touched every inch of me, slow and aching, like he'd waited years for this. I met him rhythm for rhythm, desire for desire, and we moved in a way that made everything else disappear. The couch creaked beneath us. My breath came fast, and I let my hips roll into his over and over, faster now, breath caught in my throat, heart hammering so hard it shook my ribs. It built like a storm, slow at first, then violent. Our bodies moved with a rhythm that you don't learn. It's in you, waiting, like a memory that only needs the right hands to unlock. Every nerve fired, every inch lit up from the inside. I clung to him, legs locked, and when it came, it wasn't a release. It was an unraveling. My body shook against his. He followed, tense and breathless, face buried in my shoulder, and I felt the tremor roll through him like an earthquake under skin. After, we didn't move for a long time. Our bodies stayed tangled, limbs limp, chests heaving against each other. His hand rested on my hip, thumb tracing slow circles, like he still needed the contact, like the connection hadn't broken with the climax but stretched even further. I lay there, head on his chest, listening to his heart slow down beneath my cheek, and I realized something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't casual. This was the beginning of something that would require all of me. Morning came soft, just a shift in light across the floorboards. He was still there, one arm draped over my waist, his chest rising slow and deep beneath my cheek. I didn't rush to get up. My body had no interest in movement. It had been used, cherished, opened like a sealed box that hadn't seen light in too long. I watched the way his hand flexed lightly in sleep, how his brow twitched at some unseen dream, how a faint smile curled into his bottom lip. My fingers brushed his chest without thought, tracing the faint line of hair down the center, my touch soft now, not driven by need but by gratitude, the kind that sits low in your stomach and rises slowly, warm and quiet and complete. Eventually, we made it to the kitchen. I wore nothing but one of his oversized t-shirts, hair tangled, lips slightly bruised from the night before. He moved easily around the space like it belonged to both of us now, pulling down mugs, opening cabinets, handing me coffee with that crooked smile. We sat on the back deck, sun climbing higher, pool water glittering below. His hand rested on my thigh, thumb sweeping lazy lines into my skin, and it felt natural, like he'd always touched me this way. I looked at him and smiled fully without hesitation. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, and kissed my cheek with a tenderness that belonged to something more than just a fling. This hadn't been a night of forgetting. It had been a beginning, one I didn't see coming but felt ready to step into. Barefoot, blameless, coffee in hand, body aching and open to whatever came next. The rest of the day unraveled slow and warm. He stayed, I cooked. We swam again, but it was different, less charged, more playful. We splashed like teenagers. I sat on the edge while he floated below, legs in the water, fingers trailing his chest as he passed. There was laughter, lightness, the kind of intimacy that doesn't cling but lingers. I found myself watching him with a softness I hadn't offered anyone in years. This man with a body that could make me forget my name, and hands that knew how to unmake a woman without breaking her spirit. He looked at me like I was the whole reason the pool existed. Later, I wrapped myself in a towel, laid out beside him, and let the sun dry our skin. He kissed my shoulder, nuzzled his nose into my neck, and I closed my eyes not from weariness, but to savor every sensation. My home didn't feel empty anymore. The second time came without darkness to hide in. It came in broad daylight, with full sun stretching across the pool deck, with the heat of midday pouring down on skin that had already been claimed once, but hadn't cooled since. I heard the back gate click open, soft steps on gravel, and even before I turned, I felt it. He was shirtless, tan deepened, swim trunks riding low. I leaned on the railing, heart doing that slow pound that comes when the body has already memorized someone else's rhythm. There was no hesitation when our eyes met. No question about what would happen next. I walked barefoot down the deck, sun pressing heat into every exposed inch. When I reached him, there was no tentative greeting. His hands found my waist. Mine went to his chest. Our mouths met with less gentleness this time, less patience, more ache, more familiarity. His lips parted mine without request, tongue moving with the confidence of someone who already knew what made my back arch. We moved inside. The door slamming behind us seemed to seal something, to make it official in a way words never could. Bodies all urgency now. Shedding clothing without ceremony. There was no unspoken apology, no delicate handling of age or skin or imperfections, only hands on hips, fingers digging into thighs, mouths claiming collarbones and breasts like they deserved to be mapped again and again. The couch wasn't enough this time. We made it to the floor, cool hardwood against fevered skin, our breath growing louder, faster. He lifted my leg with one arm, kissed the underside of my knee, then lowered himself between my thighs like he was exactly where he belonged. And the movement was slow at first, deep, controlled. But each thrust carried more weight, more want, until we were gasping into each other's mouths, clinging to arms, shoulders, hair. My hands gripped his back, nails leaving trails down the tight muscle. I let my head fall back, throat exposed, cries escaping without shame. It built like a storm, slow at first, then violent. Our bodies moved with a rhythm you don't learn. It's in you waiting. My hips rolled into his over and over, faster now. Breath caught in my throat, heart hammering so hard it shook my ribs. He pressed deeper, chest slick with sweat against mine, arms holding me tight, voice a low growl against my neck. When it came, it wasn't a release. It was an unraveling. My body shook against his. Every nerve fired, every inch lit up from the inside. I clung to him, legs locked, a cry caught in my throat that felt too big to hold back. He followed, tense, breathless, and I felt the tremor roll through him. We didn't move for a long time after. Our bodies stayed tangled, limbs limp, chests heaving. His hand rested on my hip, thumb tracing slow circles, like he still needed the contact. We didn't rush to get up. My body had no interest in movement. It had been used, cherished, opened like a sealed box that hadn't seen light in too long, and the satisfaction that followed was physical but also something more. It was emotional, maybe even cellular. I lay there, head on his chest, letting his fingers stroke my hair, listening to his heart slow beneath my cheek. My thighs still ached, my lips still swollen, my breath still unsteady. And yet, I felt clearer than I had in months, maybe years. We lay on the floor, naked in every way, the air around us thick with sweat and salt and something sweeter. I turned my face into the curve of his neck, kissed the skin there, slow and soft, and felt him sigh long, contented, full. He stayed, and I didn't ask him to leave. The morning came soft, just a shift in light across the floorboards, and the quiet hum of the ceiling fan stirring the air. He was still there, one arm draped over my waist, his chest rising slow and deep beneath my cheek. I didn't rush to get up. My body had no interest in movement. It had been used, cherished, and the satisfaction that followed was complete. I watched the way his hand flexed lightly in sleep, how his brow twitched at some unseen dream, and I realized that something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't about scratching an itch or filling a void that had been empty for too long. This was about a man who saw me, really saw me, and found something worth staying for. Eventually, we made it to the kitchen. I wore nothing but one of his oversized t-shirts, hair tangled, lips bruised. He moved easily around the space, pulling down mugs, opening cabinets, handing me coffee with that smile. We sat on the back deck, sun climbing higher, pool water glittering below. His hand rested on my thigh, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I looked at him and smiled without hesitation. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, and kissed my cheek with a tenderness that belonged to something more than just a fling. This hadn't been a night of forgetting. It had been a beginning. Over the following weeks, we fell into something that resembled a rhythm, though it was a rhythm neither of us had planned for. He stopped being the tenant in the guest cottage, and started being someone who simply belonged in my spaces. His clothes mingled with mine in the closet. His coffee mug sat beside mine on the counter. His presence filled rooms that had echoed with absence for far too long. We didn't talk about what we were doing or what it meant. We just lived it, day by day, night by night. We swam in the pool like it was ours, splashed like teenagers, floated under the stars like we were the only two people in the world. We cooked together, laughed together, made love with increasing tenderness and depth. The age difference that had seemed so significant at first faded into irrelevance. It mattered less than the way he looked at me, less than the care he took with my body, less than the fact that he chose to stay. Every morning I woke expecting him to be gone, and every morning he was still there, arm draped over my waist, breathing soft and deep. I found myself watching him in unguarded moments. The way his brow furrowed when he was thinking, the curve of his shoulders, the strength in his hands. He was beautiful, but that wasn't why I wanted him. I wanted him because he saw me. He looked at a woman in her middle years and didn't see something past its prime. He saw something worth wanting. My friends started to notice. The way I smiled more, the way I moved through the world differently, the way the weight of loneliness had lifted from my shoulders. They asked questions, and I gave vague answers because I didn't know how to explain what was happening. How do you describe falling in love with someone who looks like he could be your son? How do you justify the way it feels right, the way it feels like coming home? But I didn't need to justify it. Not to them and not to myself. What we had was real. It was built on honesty and attraction, and the kind of vulnerability that comes when you let someone see you completely. It was built on laughter and water, and the simple fact that we chose each other again and again, even when the world suggested we shouldn't. One night, we lay on the pool deck under the stars, his head on my chest, my fingers running through his hair. The world was quiet around us. The pool was still, and I realized that this was what I'd been missing all those years of solitude. Not just sex, though that was part of it. Not just companionship, though that was part of it too. But being seen, being wanted, being chosen not out of obligation or habit, but out of genuine desire. He looked up at me, eyes dark in the moonlight. There was a question there, unspoken but present. I didn't answer with words. I kissed him instead, slow and deep, pouring everything I felt into the contact. He understood. He always did. We never said the word love. Neither of us was brave enough for that yet, but everything between us pulsed with it anyway. Like a song we both knew the words to but didn't dare sing just yet. It lived in every touch, every glance, every moment of connection that passed between us. My home had transformed. It was no longer an empty vessel that I moved through out of habit and necessity. It was alive now, filled with breath and laughter and the sound of someone else existing in the spaces I'd occupied alone for so long. The silence, that had once felt like sanctuary, now felt like a loss when he wasn't there. But he was there. More often than not, he was there. And I was learning that being loved by someone could be just as transformative as learning to love yourself. They weren't mutually exclusive. They could exist together, building on each other, creating something neither of us could have created alone. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if this would last or if it would burn out like a match too bright to sustain. But I was learning not to worry about that. I was learning to live in the moments as they came, to savor the present instead of bracing for an inevitable future loss. He was still in the guest cottage officially, though he spent most nights in my bed. He still paid rent, though I'd told him he didn't need to. He maintained the pretense of boundaries even as we erased them completely. Maybe that was his way of protecting both of us, of maintaining some thin thread of propriety in a situation that was anything but proper. Or maybe it was his way of keeping the door open, of reminding himself that he could leave if he wanted to, that he was choosing to stay, not trapped into staying. I understood that. I respected it. I had spent too many years with people who felt obligated to be with me to want anyone to stay out of anything other than genuine desire. So we existed in this liminal space, this beautiful in-between where we were together but not quite officially together, where he was my tenant and my lover and my reason for smiling without thinking about it, where I was his landlady and his muse and the woman he'd chosen to come home to. One evening, as we were sitting on the deck watching the sunset, he took my hand and brought it to his lips, kissing my palm like it was something sacred. The gesture was simple, but it contained volumes. It was a promise and a thank you and a declaration all at once. I didn't ask him what he meant. I didn't need to. I squeezed his hand and let him hold mine as the sun sank below the horizon and the sky transformed into shades of purple and gold. The night would come soon, and with it, more of this beautiful existence we'd built together. My life had been quiet for so long, predictable, safe in the way that safety can become a kind of death, a slow erosion of self that happens so gradually you don't notice until you've disappeared almost completely. But he had pulled me back from that edge, or maybe I'd pulled myself,